If you've ever watched a nature documentary and seen something so bizarre, so alien, that it feels like a badly written horror movie, you know the feeling.
Hmm.
That sense of sheer existential strangeness. We're talking about control, but not, high-level human political control.
Not at all.
We're talking about life forms that completely bypass the conscious mind of their host and essentially overwrite its most basic survival instincts, driving it towards some kind of inevitable, often pre-programmed end.
Very specific end.
I mean, imagine this for a second. A tiny thread-like worm growing huge inside a cricket, and then it suddenly triggers an impulse so strong that the cricket it absolutely must, abandon its life on land and just leap into the nearest body of water to drown itself.
And then the worm just emerges, ready to continue its own life, leaving this dead host behind.
Or what about the fungus that drives an ant to climb a specific blade of grass, bite down with a death grip at a precise, ecologically perfect height, and then it just waits?
It waits for the right moment to sprout a spore-releasing stalk right out of its head. These are the real-life examples we're diving into today. Borrowed bodies.
And this journey, it's going to take us from these really extreme biological puppets all the way to the subtle, almost undetectable nudges that microbes and even pure ideas might be using to steer how we feel and what we do.
Hi, and welcome to Brain Binge, the show where we dive way too deep into the weird side of reality. Whether you're trying to fall asleep, stuck on a late-night drive, cleaning your room, or just need something interesting in the background, thanks for hanging out with us.
If you enjoyed our previous deep dives into things like a world without sleep or a planet without electricity or how animals can sense things we can't even imagine, you'll probably appreciate this slightly unsettling journey. It's a tour of how life forms manage to borrow the bodies and minds of others for their own survival.
And that's really the core mission today. We're going to move from these really clear, shocking biological examples, then to more subtle chemical influences, and finally to what you could call informational parasites.
And all of it kind of circles back to this one fundamental question.
Right. Who or what is actually running this body? When it really comes down to it, is the self truly in charge?
Okay, let's just dive right in then. Let's start with what many people consider the heavyweight champion of this kind of subtle manipulation, and it's one that a lot of you have probably heard of, even if you don't know the mechanism. Toxoplasma gondii.
Toxoplasma gondii, yeah. It's a single-celled protozoan, and it's a master manipulator.
Yeah.
And it's driven by this incredibly specific evolutionary need.
It needs a cat.
It needs a cat. For it to complete its sexual life cycle, to reproduce, it absolutely must end up in the gut of a domestic cat. It can infect pretty much all warm-blooded animals, birds, mice, billions of humans, but the cat is the final required host.
So its entire strategy, everything it does, is engineered to get from some intermediate host, like a mouse, into a cat's mouth.
Exactly. And the way it does this in rodents is, well, it's a terrifyingly perfect calibration of behavior. It's not just that the mice or rats get sick.
No, it's more than that. Their fundamental hardwired fear response is, it's not just turned down, it's flipped on its head.
It is inverted. Infected rodents show radically altered fear responses. The most famous finding, which has been shown again and again, is that they become less afraid of cat odor.
Which should be the #1 runaway signal for a mouse.
Absolutely. The smell of a predator, especially cat urine, is one of the strongest, most instinctual triggers for avoidance. It's survival 101. But these toxo-infected rodents, they show indifference. And in some lab experiments, they even show an active fatal attraction to the scent.
Fatal attraction. So the parasite is essentially taking down the do not enter sign from the cat's hunting ground.
It's taking it down and putting up a welcome mat. And what's more, these infected animals, they become much more exploratory. They're less anxious about being in open spaces. They take more risks.
Which just makes them way more likely to be seen and caught by a cat.
Exactly. The parasite directly benefits from this calculated increase in vulnerability.
Okay, but the question is how? How is this microscopic thing making such a massive neurological change? I mean, what is it doing in the brain?
This is where you see the genius of its evolutionary targeting. Researchers found that the parasitic cysts, they don't just spread out randomly. They accumulate in very specific brain regions.
Where?
Mostly in areas involved in fear processing and sense of smell. So the amygdala, for instance.
The amygdala, right? The brain's fear center.
Exactly, the fear center. So this suggests the parasite isn't just causing general damage or inflammation, it's placing its operational hubs precisely where they can interfere with the host's most fundamental defensive behaviors.
And it's not just a physical thing, right? It's
Yeah.
chemical too.
Oh, absolutely. It's biochemical warfare.
Mm.
The infection significantly changes the balance of key neurotransmitters, the chemicals that run the nervous system. Dopamine, for instance, has been really strongly implicated.
Dopamine is the reward and motivation chemical.
Right. So if the parasite can subtly increase dopamine levels when the mouse encounters a risky situation, like smelling cat urine, it essentially makes risk-taking feel rewarding. It's using the host's own toolkit, its own internal reward system, to build a chemical path that leads right to the cat.
Okay, this is where it gets, well, a little unsettling for us. A huge fraction of the world's population carries latent toxoplasma. We're talking billions of people.
This is the monumental bridge we have to cross very, very carefully. We're jumping from proven cause and effect biology in rodents to something that is highly complex, correlational, and, frankly, controversial in humans.
So what are these correlations? What have studies suggested?
Well, some observational research has tried to link latent toxo-infection to various subtle behavioral shifts in humans, things like a slightly higher risk of traffic accidents.
The idea being what, increased impulsivity or something?
Or slower reaction times, yeah. And there are also some reported differences in novelty-seeking behavior, or even small shifts in personality profiles.
And I've seen mentions of associations with certain psychiatric conditions too.
Absolutely. The correlation has been noted in some studies looking at schizophrenia and other mood disorders. But, and this is the point where we have to just put up a huge blinking sign.
A huge caveat.
A huge caveat. These human studies are entirely correlational. The effects they report are generally very small, statistically, and often highly disputed because there are so many other factors involved. We are not saying that toxoplasma is turning people into thrill seekers or causing mental illness.
So just to be clear for anyone listening, why is that distinction between it being a quiet passenger and a full-on puppet master so critical for us?
Because the human brain is just orders of magnitude more complex than a mouse's. I mean, if the parasite can subtly nudge the neurochemistry of a rodent, it's plausible, the idea is plausible, that it might exert a subtle, measurable, but definitely not deterministic influence on human behavior.
It's the difference between someone having the strings to a puppet versus what someone in the back seat occasionally tapping the steering wheel.
Or more like tampering with the radio volume while you're trying to drive. The influence is far from proven to cause major life changes, and we can't forget that things like diet, stress, medication, they all impact our neurochemistry far more dramatically.
A vital distinction. Okay, so let's leave the subtle taps on the wheel and go back to pure, unadulterated biological horror, the zombie ant.
This is one of the most programmatically controlled biological acts in all of nature. It involves the brain-hijacking fungi from the genus Ophiocordyceps. And the precision of the control here is just astonishing.
It really does sound like something straight out of science fiction. Can you walk us through what happens?
So once the fungus infects the host, usually a specific species of carpenter ant, it starts to spread throughout the ant's body.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial, it does it with this incredible biological finesse. It leaves the ant's vital organs, its motor functions, its legs.
Yeah.
It leaves them all working.
It needs a working vehicle.
It needs a working vehicle, exactly. The ant stops following its normal pheromone trails. It just sort of wanders off, confused, away from the safety of the colony.
And then comes this environmental choreography, the death grip.
Yes, this is the climax of the fungal program. The ant is compelled to leave the forest floor and climb up some vegetation. A stem, a leaf. It climbs to a very specific, narrow range of heights, usually about 10 inches off the ground.
Why that specific height?
Because that height corresponds to a particular microclimate. It has the optimal temperature and humidity that the fungus needs for its own growth and to release its spores. Once it's in position, the ant bites down with this incredible final force on the underside of the leaf's central vein, and that's its last act.
And the jaws stay locked even after it's dead. It's like a biological anchor.
It's a perfect anchor. The fungus then kills the ant, having secured this perfectly positioned, elevated corpse. Within a day or two, a stalk, a stroma, grows out of the ant's head or neck. And that elevated position ensures the spores get maximum dispersal, drifting down onto the unsuspecting colony below to start the cycle all over again.
But wait, I have a question. If the fungus is all through the body, why doesn't the ant just fall over? Like, why doesn't it have a massive seizure or something?
That is the key insight we've gotten from more recent research. The fungus doesn't just eat the brain. If it did that, the ant would lose motor control and just drop dead on the forest floor, which wouldn't help spread the spores.
Right.
Instead, the research suggests the fungus forms this dense, intricate network around the ant's brain and all throughout the body, weaving between muscle fibers. It's essentially controlling the ant from the periphery. It's a distributed network that keeps the crucial hardware intact just long enough to get into position, steering the ant's existing motor commands to climb and clamp down. It's like an invasive external control system.
Just incredible. Okay, moving from land to water, we have the hairworm. This is another case of a land insect being forced into an aquatic death.
Yeah, we're talking about hairworms or nemetomorphs. They often parasitize land insects like crickets or grasshoppers, and their whole life cycle depends on water for reproduction. That's where they mate. So they have to use their land-dwelling host as a vehicle to get back to the water.
And they get huge inside the host, don't they?
Oh, they do. They grow into these extremely long, thread-like worms that fill up a huge portion of the host's body cavity. The insect is basically just a shell carrying this massive biological passenger.
So when the worm is ready, it flips a switch.
It flips a behavioral switch.
Uh-huh.
The infected cricket or grasshopper is suddenly driven by this powerful, fatal compulsion to find water.
And then it makes that final jump.
It does. The trigger is thought to be a manipulation of the host's internal chemistry, maybe affecting how it processes hydration or even light sensitivity. But the result is this radical, non-negotiable override of the host's navigation system. A healthy cricket avoids water. The parasite makes it seek death by drowning because that's what the parasite needs to reproduce. The worm emerges, and it's completely indifferent to the drowned vehicle it just left behind.
So that's land to water. Let's look at a water-adjacent host, a snail being forced into danger on land, the pulsating snail.
This involves certain species of flatworms, specifically Leucochloridium. It's another complicated life cycle. Snails are the intermediate host, and birds are the final host, where the flatworm reproduces.
And the visual manipulation here is what makes this one so unforgettable. The parasite turns one of the snail's body parts into an advertisement.
It's just pure evolutionary genius. It's optical deception. The flatworm larvae, they form these colorful, pulsating brood sacs inside the snail's eye stalks. So these stalks, which the snail normally uses to sense light, they become grotesquely swollen and throb with bright, contrasting colors, usually striped green and yellow.
Making them look like a caterpillar or a grub.
Exactly. They look like a juicy, appetizing caterpillar that birds actively hunt for. So the parasite doesn't just change the snail's chemistry. It turns the snail's own body into a fishing lure for its next host.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there. Behaviorally, the infected snail, which would normally hide in dark, sheltered places, is compelled to move out into exposed, brightly lit areas. It defies its normal protective instincts and puts itself right in the sightline of a hungry bird.
So the bird pecks the caterpillar, ingests the parasite, and the cycle is complete.
What's really fascinating here is that the bird often just pecks off the infected eye stalk. The snail frequently survives the encounter. Often, yes. It then tries to regrow the stalk and can even get reinfected later.
Yeah.
The parasite gets what it needs, the brood sac, without necessarily killing the vehicle, which is an interesting model of efficiency.
Okay, one more really specific manipulation. The liver fluke and the ant's cold-activated death grip.
Ah, yes. The lancet liver fluke, Dicrochelium dendriticum. It's a very convoluted journey. It goes from snails to ants, and then it has to get inside a large grazing mammal like a sheep or a cow to reproduce.
So the ant is this tiny, crucial bridge.
And the manipulation is surgically specific. So the ant eats the fluke larvae. Most of them stay in the body cavity. But one crucial fluke, kind of the designated driver, migrates to the ant's brain. It lodges itself right near the subesophageal ganglion, which is the nerve cluster controlling the mandibles.
And the timing of this is what's so incredible.
It's entirely temperature dependent. During the warm day, the infected ant behaves totally normally, foraging, doing its colony duties. But when the cool evening temperatures arrive, right when large mammals are most likely to be grazing, that brain fluke activates its control system.
And what happens?
The ant is compelled to climb up the nearest blade of grass and clamps down with its mandibles right at the very tip. This grass-stopping behavior just freezes it in place, waiting to be eaten.
Making it easy pickings for a grazing cow or sheep.
Exactly. But here's the genius part. If the ant survives the night, once the temperature rises again, the fluke seems to temporarily release control. The ant climbs down, goes back to its normal behavior, and just waits for the next cold evening to repeat the whole risky process.
That is chilling. The fact that it's reversible. Okay, finally, let's just briefly touch on this idea of a parasitic wasp turning its host into a bodyguard.
This involves parasitoid wasps. The example is Dinocampus coccinelli, which attacks the ladybird beetle. The wasp injects an egg into the ladybird, and the larva develops inside.
But when the larva emerges, it doesn't just kill the host.
No, the ladybird is not immediately killed. It's alive, but paralyzed and completely subservient. After the wasp larva emerges and spins a cocoon underneath it, the ladybird just stands right over the cocoon. It's been transformed into an animated shield.
A shield?
Yes. If a predator comes near, say, a spider, the ladybird twitches violently and aggressively, which often scares the attacker away. It becomes a living bodyguard for the parasite during its most vulnerable stage.
So even after it's left the body, the parasite is still exerting control.
It's using its chemically induced influence. And what's really insightful here is that in a number of cases, after the adult wasp emerges and flies away, the ladybird can actually recover and go back to its normal behavior.
Which proves it's not just random damage, it's a targeted, induced manipulation.
Exactly. So if we pull all of these extreme examples together, what's the common thread? What's the synthesis?
It seems to be that nature is efficient. It doesn't build a new control panel from scratch.
It just overwrites the software. These parasites, the fungi, the worms, the wasps, they aren't using magic. They're expert evolutionary programmers who hijack existing neurochemical and hormonal systems. They introduce a molecule, block a receptor, position themselves next to a nerve. They just use the tools already present in the host's body to achieve their own goals.
And that idea, that evolutionary shortcut, is what connects all these bizarre cases to the more subtle influences that we face every day.
Which leads us perfectly to perhaps the most famous classic mammalian example of this, the rabies virus.
Right. Rabies is this stark, high-contrast, deadly blueprint for how a simple virus can totally reshape a host's behavior to maximize its own spread.
And unlike the fungi or the flukes, rabies operates almost entirely on the nervous system of mammals, dogs, bats, raccoons, humans.
To understand the manipulation, you have to understand how it travels through the body, right? It's not just floating in the blood.
No, that's key. After the initial infection, usually from a bite, the virus doesn't immediately go for the brain. It uses this highly effective strategy called retrograde axonal transport.
It hitches a ride.
It essentially hitches a ride up the host's peripheral nerve fibers, traveling silently toward the central nervous system, bypassing most of the immune defenses in the bloodstream. It can take weeks, even months, to reach the brain. But once it's there, the manipulation phase begins.
And the late-stage symptoms are all directly linked to its strategy for getting to the next host.
Absolutely. The characteristic symptoms are all functionally strategic. You see extreme agitation, aggression, and this overwhelming compulsion to bite.
Because the virus has moved into the salivary glands.
Exactly. Having reached the brain, it then travels back out to the periphery and concentrates heavily in the salivary glands. So by inducing aggression and biting, it ensures it can transfer itself directly, via saliva, into the tissue of a new host.
And what about hydrophobia, the fear of water? What role does that play?
That's often misinterpreted. It's not really a psychological fear of water. It's a physiological symptom. Swallowing becomes excruciatingly painful because the virus affects the neuromuscular control in the throat.
I see.
But from the virus's perspective, this is a huge benefit. By preventing the infected animal from swallowing or clearing its throat, it keeps the saliva, full of virus, highly concentrated in the mouth, ready for transmission.
So every key symptom, the aggression, the biting, the difficulty swallowing, it all serves the virus's primary directive: get out and infect.
It's a highly evolved, optimized system for spread. Rabies is such a clear, dramatic example of evolution-shaping behavior through infection. And if a virus can achieve that level of control over a mammal's brain, it leads us right to the much more subtle, continuous influence of the vast population of microbes we all carry around with us every single day.
Yeah.
The human microbiome.
Okay, let's step away from the lethal parasites and talk about this ecosystem we all live in. We have to start with this concept of the human body as a superorganism, a holobiont.
The term superorganism is used to describe the fact that we aren't a single, isolated biological entity. The conscious us is a combined unit. It's our human cells, plus the trillions of coexisting microbes, bacteria, fungi, viruses living on our skin, in our mouths, and most critically in our gut.
And the numbers are just staggering when you look at it from a genetic perspective.
Oh, they are. Genetically, the microbial gene set just dwarfs the human genome. We're carrying around hundreds, if not thousands of times more unique microbial genes than our own human DNA contains. Our biology fundamentally depends on this massive, crowded ecosystem. There's a great line that sums it up. Your body is less a temple and more a crowded apartment building.
And what happens in that apartment building doesn't just stay there. We're talking about the gut-brain axis, these lines of communication that allow the microbes to influence our nervous system.
Right, and this communication highway, it's not speculative. It's a recognized, highly complex system. The first part is chemical signaling. Our gut microbes are basically tiny biochemical factories. They produce a huge array of substances, many of which are precursors to neurotransmitters.
So they're making the raw ingredients for things like serotonin.
For serotonin precursors, yeah, or GABA, they're basically leaking chemicals into our system that our bodies then use or react to. And critically, they produce things called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
I've heard of those. That's what they make when they digest fiber.
Exactly. When they digest fiber, we can't. SCFAs are crucial. They can cross into the bloodstream and signal the brain, helping regulate inflammation and even the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. They're a direct chemical link from our gut to our brain.
Okay, so that's one mechanism. What's the second?
The second is immune modulation. The vast majority of our immune system is located in and around the gut. The microbiome is constantly talking to those immune cells, training them, regulating our baseline inflammation levels. And we know that when inflammation is too high, it influences brain function and mood.
And the third mechanism is the direct physical wire.
That's the vagus nerve. It's often called the wandering nerve. It runs all the way from the brainstem down to the abdomen. It's a major highway for sensory information. And this is critical because in rodent experiments, when they surgically cut the vagus nerve, some of the behavioral changes they could induce by transplanting microbiomes just disappeared.
So it's like the dedicated high-speed fiber optic line while the bloodstream is the slower general mail system.
That's a perfect analogy. The vagus nerve allows for rapid, direct communication. The fact that cutting it eliminates some of these effects strongly suggests it's carrying crucial behavior-modifying messages from the gut to the brain.
Okay, so we have the chemical leaks, the immune system, and a direct nerve line. What's the evidence this actually translates into behavioral changes? Let's start with the animal experiments.
The foundation of this field really rests on experiments using germ-free mice animals raised in completely sterile environments with no microbiome at all.
And they're different.
They are profoundly different. They show altered stress responses, major differences in anxiety-like behavior, impaired social behavior. Their brains literally developed differently because they were missing that microbial input early in life.
Wow.
And even more striking are the transplant studies. You can take the gut microbes from one animal, say a highly anxious strain of mouse, and transplant them into one of these germ-free mice. In some cases, the recipient mouse will start to exhibit aspects of the donor's temperament.
So you can transfer behavioral tendency just by transferring the gut bacteria.
In rodents, yes. The conclusion is inescapable. Microbes demonstrably contribute to baseline mood and temperament in these animals.
But, and this is the big but, the leap from lab mice to complex human psychology is huge. Where are we with the human studies? This is where we need that caution again.
This is where we have to tread very carefully. The research is exciting, but it's in its infancy. Researchers have reported associations between the composition of the gut microbiome and various human conditions: depression, anxiety, stress resilience.
And this has led to all the hype around psychobiotics and special diets.
It has. But the small clinical trials testing these things show very mixed, modest, and early-stage results. Some studies might show a marginal improvement in stress, but they're often hard to replicate.
So we need to really hammer home the caveats here. What's the biggest one?
The biggest one is correlation versus causation. It's a two-way street. Being stressed or depressed causes people to change their diet, their sleep, their hormones, all of which dramatically changes the microbiome. So is the bad mood causing the microbial change, or is it the other way around?
It's not a simple switch you can flip.
Absolutely not. And there's no single good human microbiome. Diversity and a healthy, fiber-rich diet seem to be key for resilience. But the idea that we can find one microbe that's an on-off switch for personality is just far too simplistic.
So the safe takeaway is that the microbiome is one influential factor among many, a major passenger in that crowded apartment building.
A major passenger, yes. but it's one among many genetic, environmental, and social inputs.
Okay, so both the microbiome and the classic parasites point to this same principle we talked about earlier. They tweak, they don't invent, they use the tools we already have.
That is the critical insight. It's about evolutionary efficiency. A parasite isn't going to evolve a whole new chemical system to control a host. It's much simpler to just manipulate the control panel that's already there, the hormones and neurotransmitters that are already powerful drivers of behavior.
Can you give us a few more examples of that hormonal tweaking?
In insects, it's clearest with developmental hormones. A parasite might produce compounds that mimic the host's own hormones to, say, put metamorphosis on permanent hold, keeping the host in a convenient larval stage so the parasite has more time to develop.
It hits the pause button on the host's life cycle.
Exactly. Or in mammals, they might target things that drive social behavior. They can manipulate steroid hormones like testosterone to change aggression, or stress hormones like cortisol to suppress immunity or increase risk-taking.
And this brings us back around to toxoplasma. We can put its mechanism squarely in this framework now.
Right. The hypothesized pathway there is the manipulation of dopamine. Dopamine already exists to reward necessary behaviors like eating and exploring. By just turning up that dopamine dial in risky situations, the parasite encourages the host to take chances. It doesn't need to invent a fearless molecule. It just exploits the host's existing pathways for motivation.
So, if these biological hijackers are just exploiting our existing chemical hardware, what does that say about our everyday experience, even without an infection?
It forces us to reflect on our own agency. Our moods, our impulses, our risk assessments, they are constantly being steered by our own internal chemistry. Fluctuating hormones, neuromodulators, seasonal changes. Infection is just an external entity finding and exploiting the internal control panel that already exists. We are, chemically speaking, always being steered by inputs we don't consciously control.
Now, let's take a metaphorical leap. We've covered biological parasites that physically hijack bodies and microbial passengers that chemically nudge minds. Let's go to the informational level and talk about cultural units that seem to borrow our attention and behavior. The concept of memes.
This idea from Richard Dawkins defines memes as units of cultural information slogans, ideas, viral challenges, songs that spread by copying from mind to mind. They are, in a sense, informational parasites that depend on a human host for replication.
And how do they achieve this metaphorical parasitism?
They succeed by shaping our behavior in ways that help them replicate, often regardless of whether they're true or useful to us. The most successful memes are the ones that have instructions for their own spread built right in.
Like a conspiracy theory that instills fear, making you feel like you have to warn others.
Exactly. An idea that makes you talk about it, argue about it, or share it is the successful meme, whether it's true, kind, or good for your mental health. Some belief systems are particularly good at this. They often embed rewards for recruiting others, like social validation and punish doubt, creating strong in-group, out-group boundaries.
So they exploit our existing psychological drives, the need for certainty, the desire for social connection, to get us to spread the idea.
It's the informational parallel to the biological parasite. And this spread happens even with neutral behaviors through what we call social contagion. We know that behavior and emotions spread through social networks almost like a mild virus.
And this isn't just anecdotal, right? There's data on this.
Oh, absolutely. Studies have tracked the spread of exercise habits, smoking cessation, even weight gain, and general moods like happiness through social networks, up to 3 degrees of separation. We do it through imitation, peer pressure, shared environments.
And in the modern era, the algorithm is the ultimate amplifier for this.
Precis. Online recommendation systems are designed to learn what grabs and holds our attention. They optimize for engagement and replication, not for accuracy or nuance. And the unfortunate reality is that intense high-arousal emotions, outrage, fear, novelty spread much faster and get more attention than calm, reasoned thought.
So the platform itself rewards the most infectious and often negative emotional state because that's what keeps us engaged.
In that metaphorical sense, these digital platforms and viral ideas are highly evolved borrowers. They borrow our most precious resource, our attention, and they use our innate human drives to propagate themselves, often without any regard for the integrity of the information. The human mind becomes the medium, and the algorithms are the evolutionary bottleneck, selecting for maximum spread.
Okay, let's pull all this together. We started with precision-engineered death grips in ants, and we ended with algorithms amplifying viral outrage. What does this whole spectrum of influence, biological, chemical, informational, tell us about who we are?
It suggests that the conscious you is not some singular independent entity standing apart from its biology. It's the complex result of multiple, often competing layers of influence.
You've got the deep evolutionary drives, the biological passengers like microbes, the internal chemical signals, and then the informational passengers, the memes and ideas.
Exactly. It's less like a single pilot driving a car and more like a crowded cockpit where everyone has a hand on the steering wheel. And sometimes, a well-placed fungus is tapping the gas pedal at midnight.
It really calls into question the whole idea of, I decided. If all these forces are constantly tugging on the controls, modulating our risk tolerance, our anxiety, our impulse to share, what does that phrase even mean?
We like to imagine the self as this untouched core of pure agency. But the evidence suggests it's profoundly permeable. The self isn't a commander so much as a mediator, a spokesperson for an internal coalition of influences.
It's trying to build a coherent story to explain why we felt compelled to do something.
And that's where that other line comes in. Sometimes I wanted to, that really means my microbes, my hormones, my social circle, and 3 targeted ad campaigns wanted that.
Exactly. It challenges that traditional concept of free will. But that doesn't have to be a fatalistic, we're all just puppets kind of conclusion.
Not at all. The very fact that we can sit here and analyze these influences, the act we're engaged in right now, is itself an exercise of agency.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought for you to consider.
Yes. If the self is defined by this constant push and pull, then maybe true agency isn't about being untouched or uninfluenced by outside forces. That state might not even be biologically possible.
So what is it then?
Instead, true agency might be the continuous process of learning to recognize which of those many voices, biological, chemical, or informational, we choose to amplify and listen to, and which ones we choose to actively resist and override. The choice isn't to be free of influence, but to choose the influence you follow.
This has been a deeply fascinating and, occasionally unsettling tour through the nature of control. From the zombie ant fungus to the silent chemistry of the gut-brain axis, and finally to the informational hooks that grab our attention every day. We are undeniably permeable, borrowed bodies.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Whether you're drifting off to sleep, driving, studying, or getting things done in the background, we appreciate you spending your time with us.
If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to explore more of the strange reality we inhabit, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us what subject you'd like us to bring under the microscope next.
Until next time, keep questioning who is running your ship, and stay curious.
That's it for this episode of Brain Binge. If you enjoyed getting your mind twisted tonight, do me a favor, comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Got a weird fact, mystery, or place you want an episode about? Drop it in the comments. I read as many as I can, and I'm always hunting for new ideas. Thanks for listening, and thanks for letting your brain binge with me for a while. Stay well, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.